What makes Pantheon such an enthralling upcoming MMORPG is its overall emphasis on making the world a dangerous place to traverse. This comes not only from the minions and treacherous creatures that inhabit Terminus, but also from the planet itself, which has been torn to shreds through impacts and collisions from other worlds. From the common phrase of "make worlds, not games," Pantheon Rise of the Fallen looks to put the E back in PVE, and in this two-part video series, we'll look to dig into this concept of dangerous environments in which we will adventure, overcome, and at times, find our bitter ends. In part 1, we will be discussing Climate and the Acclimation system in some depth. The next video, we will be covering Atmosphere and Artifact systems. And finally, we will wrap up these two videos and concepts by discussing them with the community, as well as how they may affect one another on an episode of PantheonPlusYou. Oh, and for those of you that love lore, expect to see another video in Theric's perception of Pantheon tied into this monthly topic. We truly hope that you'll join us and participate with your comments, your feedback, ideas, and suggestions in this month-long ride discussing the two very important systems and how they are going to affect our future home of Terminus. So let's kick things off by throwing a quote out there from Chris Joppa Perkins, which states, "You may have heard us say something like, 'We're going to put the E back in PvE' during a stream or an interview. Great catchphrase, but what really matters is making that true. That's what design is all about. Taking a high-level idea or a goal and working out the lower-level details of how it'll actually be experienced as true to the players." End quote. This quote is a great reason why we wanted to highlight this topic, and it ties further into Visionary Realms' overall goal of bringing the lore of Terminus to life, and then immersing you in it. Speaking of lore, Joppa also referenced a certain piece of lore as a great inspiration into what drives this system's implementation and importance. He referenced a key passage from the story A Night of Five Voices. Now, I could sit here and try to read you this lore piece myself, butchering all the names as you guys know I would. But I figured let's hear it straight from professional voice actor Chris Kane. As you're listening, envision yourself in this frigid environment and feel the winds on your brow, as if you were walking in Terminus.
The two of us followed him into the snowlands. I tell you very little of this portion of the journey, as it was miserable to endure, and truthfully, I don't recall much. I know we trekked for some time. More than once I thought I had been asleep even as we walked. It seemed as if the darkness of the night were enhanced, as there was a gloom and shadow that hung in the air. It was bitterly cold, and the land itself was frost-chapped. In the midst of these surroundings, the mere strides of my two companions, wedded with whatever mystical empowerments enhanced their bodies, transformed me once again into the child with sticks for weapons. And I could not understand why I was there. For all those hours, I could barely discern our direction. At length, I drew the courage to stammer a question across my frigid lips.
Welcome back, but let's get into another quote from Chris Joppa Perkins, in which he states, "We want you to feel the snow-covered and frost-chapped lands, the bitter cold, and the breath moving across your character's frigid lips. The more we can make you feel like you're there, the more successful this system will be, the more immersive the environment has become." This is where extreme climates come into play, to allow us to feel the adventure and the world around us. Let's dig into these extreme climates one by one as I attempt to give basic definitions to help us understand or maybe know what to expect. First, let's start with Scorching, which is defined as having a high or higher than desirable temperature, giving off heat, or feeling or causing a sensation of burning, hot and dry enough to burn or parch a surface. The next is Frigid, in a very cold temperature, intensely cold, often resulting in very little precipitation and often areas of high wind. Following up that exact definition with wind shear, it's a sudden and forceful speed or directional change in winds, causing temperature inversions or density gradients, can possibly result in the forming of tornadoes. Next up is anaerobic, relating to involving or requiring the absence of free oxygen. Next is toxic, poisonous, harmful, or bad. An environment that causes you to become very ill, nauseous, or causes dizziness. And finally, pressure. Defined as the force per unit area, intense atmospheric pressure can cause tissues to accelerate inward against the liquids and solids of your body, causing the feeling of puncture from every direction until there are no air pockets remaining. Each of these categories will have 5 different tiers of potency, causing the more severe effects to players as they rise through higher tiers. While we will get into acclimation later, increasing in tiers of potency will obviously raise the need for acclimation in order to negate it. While we don't know everything that these 6 different extreme climates will bring, we were given quite a bit of detail in regards to the frigid climate. So let's go over what we know about this climate, but first, let's start with a quote from Japa. An extreme climate's core detriment is the effect that will apply to all players immediately upon entering the climate area. The core detriment will typically consist of several layered effects which can be mitigated by increasing the acclimation score towards that specific climate. The frigid climate's core detriment is called Glacial Pace. So let's start by actually explaining what Glacial Pace is. So entering the frigid climate will actually immediately decrease your movement speed, decrease your attack speed, increase casting time, and it will also increase the cooldown time on your abilities. So aside from this core element, however, we were given details about 3 other conditions that one could suffer from, if not properly acclimated in the frigid environment. The first of these is frozen lungs. A target player will take a jolt of damage, losing X% of maximum health based on the climate tier. While frozen lungs is active, endurance will drain until empty and not be regenerated by natural means until frozen lungs is no longer in effect. The next is Frostbite. A player takes a jolt of damage, losing X% of maximum health based on the climate tier. Places a counter on the player that will last until the player leaves the climate area. At 5 stacks of Frostbite, the player will be unable to engage in melee or ranged attacks, and spellcasting will become disabled. The chances Frostbite will occur will increase dramatically in higher tier frigid climates. And finally, the last is Hypothermia. This effect can only occur if at least one other sporadic detriment is active on the player. A player will take a jolt of damage, losing X% of maximum health based on the climate tier. While hypothermia is active, the player will lose Y amount of health every second until the player is dead, or hypothermia is cured. So with that said, if you're anything like me, you really don't want to come anywhere near these complications. So as we discussed earlier, you're going to want to acclimate yourself. You do this through the use of glyphs, which will be attuned to various parts of your body, with each body part giving up to a different maximum acclimation to an extreme climate of your choice. Here was what was said back then about limits on body parts by Japa. He said that glyphs will contribute differently to the score depending on the quality of the glyph and which part of the body they are applied to. As of this writing, he said that the head will play up to 30 points, the chest will play up to 40 points, the arms up to 20, legs up to 30, feet up to 20, and in this statement he said that blood will go up to 60. Now, since getting this information from Japa back in the newsletter, we were shown the new acclimation user interface during a more recent developer stream. When looking at this new interface, you'll notice that this means I believe the aforementioned limits have one small change, in which we would be previously able to glyph our blood. It is now known as what seems to be natural acclimation. Now this is just a guess, but it seems to align with the numbers and the details Japa previously provided. Digging into the interface details a little bit, you'll notice that when you're in a climate, as the mocked up in this example, the extreme climate category will be highlighted as we see with the frigid climate indicator here. You will also see the level of danger in the climate that is presented as well. In this demo, it is listed as deadly in the bottom left of the image. Finally, you will see all the various conditions you could face, similar to those that you've seen earlier in frozen lungs, frostbite, or hypothermia, which would be listed in the bottom left. In this demo, they are just listed as climate conditions. When speaking to acclimating yourself to protect yourself from these dangers, a perfect score of 200 would give you total coverage of an acclimation. By doing simple math, you will notice that the numbers given by Japa, the player with max high-tier glyphs can have a total acclimation score of 200 provided solely by glyphs and natural acclimation, if these numbers still hold true. It is important to know that these numbers, and honestly any numbers, are always subject to testing. This obviously won't include any buffs that you may receive through various means, or gear, or perhaps even natural acclimations due to your race. It is important to note that Joppa made it clear that you could not max out all of your acclimations, and that the system's purpose, much like many of Pantheon's systems, is to create important choices for the player. When you are faced with multiple extreme climates, for example, you may decide that one climate isn't as bad for you to deal with as another might be, so perhaps you face the consequences of that climate while making sure to protect yourself from the second. This could play into the party makeup, the class you play, or even the gear that you have equipped. It is also worth mentioning that the glyphs will have various levels of rarity and difficulty to obtain. Whether crafted or obtained from powerful enemies, we will be seeking these items out to get a huge advantage within these climates. Players will be able to store these glyphs in a sort of glyph pouch that will be accessible from the previous UI that was shown, although it is yet to be shown. Another interesting thing about the glyphs is that they will be able to break, at least those of lesser quality, which means if you're not careful, you could put yourself in a pretty bad situation. That said, all glyphs within the bag are free to use and swap as long as they're in one piece. So this brings us to our final piece of the video, and a look into another extreme climate, wind shear. While we weren't given all the details on this extreme climate as we were with the frigid climate, we got to see the effects of wind shear firsthand when the developers took streamer Co-Carnage into the Island of Infinite Storms, where he was met by the horrifying Sleepless. During this small portion of the stream, Joppa gave some more detail about climates and its importance, as well as some details on wind shear when we saw its devastation in action. I'll be quiet for a couple minutes here and let you see this video for yourself, and then follow up with my closing thoughts.
Now, granted, this is pre-polish phase, so you're not going to see, kind of the being buffeted by the wind animation where you're kind of dragging across the ground or being lifted and hurled, but the mechanic is there. And the idea is when we talk about extreme climate, when we talk about wind shear, we're talking about a kind of wind force that is going to make you have a very bad day. It's one thing if, you're standing on solid ground and it's, more like it's difficult to run and reach a certain point because of the wind blowing against you. It's another thing when you're up high like this and the wind, is going to make it nearly impossible for you to adventure. Now, there are actually two wind seeds. One of them is a weaker, more constant wind force that changes direction and will, make you run faster. If it's, again, at your back, it'll make you run slower. If it's ahead of you, and it'll push you to the sides. And then there's the second wind seed, which is the full, gale force wind.
Oh, that one right there.
In this environment is very high.
Let's get you acclimated before you get blown off.
That
again.
sounds great.
Yeah.
So do I right click on this in my inventory?
Yes.
Just right click on the glyph and you will be good to go. Now that's if you right click and then you go to acclimation, you'll see that it's
Oh,
it's been
so I
applied.
think I just got blown again, but it wasn't nearly as bad.
Right.
Yeah, you'll see it's
Okay.
dampened dramatically.
Yeah.
So the wind is one aspect of this. You'll notice too there are bolts of lightning that are striking, hitting the ground. Those are live and active, meaning that they have real points of impact. They will do more damage at their point of impact and less damage splashing outwards. But those are, again, part of the environmental hazard. And there's several more things, too, that we're not going to mention.
So I'll wrap this all up with my take on the system and its importance. To begin with, this is an amazing new feature within the MMO genre that I really think is going to help paint the picture of how dangerous Terminus is. This also allows the developers to make new and interesting challenges that we haven't seen before, by mixing up boss mechanics with these extreme climates to add extra layers of strategy, preparation, and danger. Sure, we've all known about climates and acclimation for a while now, but I think that this topic is often overlooked, or maybe people are just kind of looking at it like it's some sort of side system, when I feel that it's anything but. In the October 2019 roundtable with Kilson, some of the community members even voiced concerns that the acclimation system felt like a keying system. Now I'm going to paraphrase Joppa here, but he's basically said that he has discussed in the past that both climbing and climates are a style of a keying system. and that they've never been shy about saying that. However, Joppa feels that this is a different take on keying, which will make it feel fresh because it's built to be an immersion-based keying. You won't have to go find a key to open a door a lot, but you will have to get into higher tiers of climate, and it's more than just glyphs. It's gear, it's buffs, and even some natural growth that comes from the player. Glyphs are just a small part of the climate system. While some players feel like eventually getting all the best glyphs will trivialize climates, Joppa kind of believes strongly that it's okay for people to get all the best glyphs, because if they're going to go through different areas more freely as they progress in the game and such, that the character will be showing their growth. To this point, however, he did reiterate that you'll have to make a choice when faced with multiple climates working against you at the same time. Pantheon has always been about group play, synergy, planning, and adventure. This system checks all the boxes. It is what I feel is a defining feature that makes Pantheon something new and different. That's without even talking about how well they could use this system to tie us to the lore of Pantheon as we ask ourselves how these areas came to be and why the planet is reacting the way it is. There's a lot to learn about Terminus, and these extreme areas are only the beginning. I hope you enjoyed part 1 of this 2-part series, and I hope you've maybe even learned something that makes you more excited about Pantheon Rise of the Fallen. That said, it doesn't stop here, as in our next video we will be talking about another system set, atmospheres, and artifacts. As always, let us know what you thought in the video, or perhaps the ideas you have for climate and acclimation systems, and what challenges you're looking forward to overcome. Thank you as always, and until next time.